Now, it was also a little bit of a disappointing weekend on the diamond for Nebraska baseball. 1-2 at the Frisco College Baseball Classic down in Texas. Opened up with an 8-3 win over Sam Houston, led 5-0 against number 2 LSU, ultimately fall 11-6. Then it was a 9-6 loss to K-State on Sunday, a team that is scheduled. Nebraska and Kansas State are scheduled to play 2 more times this season. You weren't down there. It was up to your buddies on the Huskers radio network on the call, but from sitting back comfy at home, taking in all of it, what were your thoughts on Will Bolt's squad this weekend going 1-2 in Texas?
Loved Friday. Loved everything about Friday, with the exception, and hopefully we're crossing our fingers that it's nothing overly serious. You would hate to see Mason McConaughey out for an extended period of time, but he had to leave the game with some elbow stuff going on there. But boy, you're hoping that he is going to be at least back at some point. That would be huge. But I everything about Friday against Sam Houston I loved, because this team throughout the week of preparation was challenged to be more competitive in their at bats. Reducing the called strike threes, reducing the weak contact pull side ground balls, all of those things that will really challenge this team. I thought collectively this group did a great job, really 1 through 9. I mean, Hogan Haligzo as the 9-hole hitter, getting a couple of hits. Guy I told you about last week, keep your eye on too, had a huge weekend, batted 500. Devin Nunez was outstanding. So,
inside the park home run, because they didn't call it a home run.
I know. I think everybody, it was great watching him round second and trotting all of a sudden, oh gosh, I better go. But yeah, so the approach offensively, I thought defensively, and give a lot of credit. Another guy that I want to make sure I mentioned too, Will Walsh, who had a tough one against Louisiana in that start in game 3 of that series, bounced back in relief, coming off of Jalen Worthley when Jalen came in for Mason McConaughey. And Will threw great, did exactly what he needed to do to close out that game, to never feel really threatened there in the latter half of that game. Then we get to Saturday in the LSU game. And this was tough for me because I was doing PA announcing for UNO hockey that night. So I'm in my car, so I'm listening to the game. Then I get in my car and LSU puts a couple runs up. So I go into the arena when it's 5-3 Nebraska. So at that point, I'm at the mercy of checking Twitter the entire time. And all of a sudden, I'm not getting any updates. So then I go to our wonderful scribes who cover Husker baseball with Evan Bland and Michael Bruntz. And so then I'm kind of going off of what they're saying and how they're describing what they're hearing and seeing. And then I talked to Ben yesterday. We do our little post-trip rundown if either one of us isn't there, our debriefing, if you will. And you really look at a couple of plays here and there, especially in that 7th inning where you could get out of that inning at 7-5 and you're still within striking distance, yet a decision to try to make a play. We saw this in Louisiana as well when it came to picking up a ball, whether it's a swinging bunt or an actual bunt. We saw this with Will Walsh and Drew Christo against Louisiana. Either having a problem picking up the ball or making a throw where you didn't need to make. And it just, all of a sudden, the merry-go-round gets going and you end up giving up a huge crooked number in the 7th inning. Little things like that. I know we could play the what could have been or shoulda, woulda, coulda, but where would that game have been if you get out of that only trailing 7-5? Yeah, you lick your wounds on that, but you're still 2 down against a team that you really had been on their pitching for most of the game, as opposed to all of a sudden just a devastating blow to add, 3 more runs on top of that before you get out of the inning, and all of a sudden you're down 10-5. That's demoralizing, especially for what was an 80-20 sold-out crowd, but 80% in favor of LSU. So they're feeling it. They're on top of you. You feel like you just let one slip away, but you still got 2 more innings to try to plug away at this thing, and just a real tough scenario there. And then yesterday felt a lot like what we saw in that final game against Louisiana, where the at-bats weren't all that competitive. It was a team that I feel like in the batter's box was pressing a lot as well. That it just, again, I think this team understands the type of season they can have. And when they're not getting maybe some of those at-bats collectively that they want to get right out of the gate, there's a little bit of pressure, I think. And I'm not saying this is being put on by the coaching staff. I really don't. I think these guys have a expectation and a standard where you can watch certain at-bats, especially certain veterans in this lineup that are just putting so much on themselves. Again, got to mention, not only Devin Nunez had one, Cale Frost. Great to see that too. Cale Frost, that's huge because there's another guy that I think he knew anytime his name was mentioned, it was always the Summit League Player of the Year, the Summit League Player of the Year. And the guy's going 16 at-bats without getting a hit. You're feeling it. And I love the way that the coaching staff handled him. They gave him a couple of games here and there off to process. Hey, that worked out well. He was a great at-bat. So amongst some of the things that we saw a week ago against Louisiana, there were also bright spots as well. If you say 1-2 in a weekend like that, there's going to be disappointment, but I think the context is also important with it as well.
You're seeing those spurts, obviously, like you had brought up, Devin Nunez the last couple of weekends, Cale Frost getting going this weekend, obviously Gabe Swanson opening weekend. But overall, and this isn't kind of like, nobody is immune to this. This weekend in particular, 10 strikeouts Friday, 8 strikeouts Saturday, 11 on Sunday. Those are some, and I know you would, I think when we talked last week, you said strikeout numbers are up across college baseball.
They are.
But for this Nebraska team and the expectations, and you want to host a regional, and Will Bolt continues to say that that's the expectation coming into every season, is to get back to in the conversation to hosting a regional. With those kind of strikeout numbers, without a lot of runs going up on the other end, that's worrisome for me early on.
Yeah, and it is a fair concern. I think when you get the swing and misses, are you looking at the at-bat itself? Was it a battle, and then all of a sudden the guy just all of a sudden was able to pump one by you? The ones that concern me, and I talked about this last week, the ones that concern me more than anything in the Louisiana series, and you saw a little bit of this yesterday too, was the called strike threes. And no, not because, that ump was blind. No, because you look like you might be either overthinking it. You don't have a feel in the batter's box is what I always chalk that up to. Of a pitcher, you got to tip your cap to them if their pitch sequence is solid and they're able to work those in to where they're getting ahead of you, and then you're trying to hit on their terms. But when you're not even attempting to swing it, it tells me that you're not seeing it. You don't have a true feel for it. And maybe there's a confidence thing where you're lost in thought, if you will. There are going to be times where a guy just pulls the string on you or comes back at you with a backdoor slider, and it's just a beautiful pitch, and it buckles you, and you turn and look at the catcher like, yep, that was a good one. But when you see enough of them, you start wondering, okay, that's more of what's going on in the batter's box. Because I know this team communicates. I know when even if a guy goes down looking or swinging, he's going back and he is communicating with that on-deck hitter immediately of what he's seeing. So that's not an issue. I think this is the individual. I think, and this is where I go back to, that's why I bring up the pressing situation. You know, guys like Gabe Swanson, guys that are more than capable of erupting at any moment, but when they're not having the type of at-bats that they expect from themselves, you start to question a lot of those different things that you already know. You start to overthink things. And then trying to get back on that simple mindset and that simple approach can be extremely challenging. And unfortunately, there's more than just two guys in the lineup that are experiencing this, in my opinion. The good news is they've all gone through this at some point in their college career, and they've battled through it. We saw how Gabe Swanson ended last season.
Yeah.
So I don't think the confidence level by the Nebraska fans should be so low that this group is going to be so Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to the offense. But now's the time, because with that expanded Big Ten, conference play begins this weekend at home. So this is where that learning curve, or that, hey, we need to get things figured out at the right time, needs to happen a little earlier, because these are those weekends now. It's go time. Yeah, you want to have success against these tough teams that you're playing in non-conference, but at the very least, you got to start taking care of business, especially when you open up conference play at home. So, yeah, there's pressure on this team right now.
I want to talk Washington and the Big Ten Conference as a whole the week ahead, but we talked about at the plate. What about on the other side defensively, the pitchers over these first few weekends, especially this weekend because it's the most recent, but the free passes and the number of hits, and obviously you get an error at any time as a pitcher and you're like, man,
Yeah.
I was throwing all right. I gave up a couple hits. I was throwing all right, but an air kind of snowballs things. So there's that aspect behind the pitchers. But on the hill, there are a number of hits being given out, and there are a lot. Obviously, one is more than you want to, but there are a lot of free passes being given as well.
Yeah, and that was the auspicious start I think that Nebraska got off to, going all the way back to the season opener against Irvine, is everybody who came into that game, starting with Mason, was uncharacteristically not wild, but trying to be too fine in the strike zone where they were just missing. It wasn't wild misses necessarily, but it was knowing that you're trying to attack a spot, but just not hitting that spot. And yeah, sometimes maybe you're not getting a certain pitch, but as every pitcher has to, just like every hitter has to, you have to adjust. As long as it's consistently called a certain way, you have to adjust to that. That's just baseball. So that was a little uncharacteristic. I thought in Arizona, Nebraska did a better job as the tournament progressed of reducing the free passes. I thought last week against Louisiana, until you got in the middle of that series, I talked about Mason's bounce back in that start against Louisiana, did great, and again, limited any type of free passes. And I think there are going to be moments that those numbers might inflate a little bit. As long as that's not the growing trend, as opposed to maybe more of an anomaly. And then I also look at who their pitching coach is too, and what he teaches, what he preaches, and the veteran arms that, as he likes to say, mastering the vanilla. And simply put, just getting that first pitch over for strike one and immediately having the advantage on the mound as opposed to in the batter's box is what this pitching staff is trained on, is what they're taught. And I think for the most part, they have that in them. And there's some power arms. This is the other thing about this staff is, and this is the good and bad thing of that. When you see somebody up there, whether it's a freshman or a sophomore, I mean, Blake Encarnacion's throwing 94, 95 yesterday. And that's exciting. You're like, oh my gosh, we got guys that can touch 96, 97. Carson Yasa can get to 99. But getting those guys to hone in that adrenaline to where, yep, you still want that explosiveness with the fastball, but are you able to drill that in the strike zone? Are you pounding that in the strike zone? And for those younger guys, that's the adjustment. Because think about it, Caleb, when you're in high school, you can be outside the zone. And with pure intimidation of 90-plus stuff, you're going to get high school hitters that are going to swing and miss because they're freaked out by that. Yep. Unless you're throwing it to the backstop, if it's even close to the zone, they're freaked out by that. College hitters, they're disciplined. 95 mile an hour doesn't overwhelm them. They're looking for spots. And if you're not hitting that spot, and if you're not hitting the strike zone, they're going to lay off. And all of a sudden, you're like, whoa, I'm throwing 95. You're supposed to be swinging this because you're scared. Well, they're not scared. So I think that's a lot with the younger guys too. Now, defensively on the whole, I would say this. There is, and the Dylan Carey error, was that really an error? That's a tough call in my opinion. That's the only position player that has committed an error. Other than that, we've seen pitchers make errors and fielding bunts and a throwing error. So I still think the guys behind the pitcher and what we've seen between Heligzo and I'll even throw in Jeske too, Will Jeske, behind the dish. Symbolista's come in a couple of times in just some spots. I think really collectively the defense has been good. Now, as I say, we've had now 3 pitchers that have not handled either a swinging bunt or a bunt great. Well, that's going to be part of the scouting report for the opposition. So they're going to continue to challenge the pitchers of coming off the mound and trying to make plays and seeing if they can make the simple, hey, we're going to give you an out. Can you successfully pick up the baseball and make an accurate throw? Sounds simple, PFP, as everyone knows, but that has been a little bit of an issue. But as far as the infield and the outfield making plays, a lot more great defensive plays than we've seen shaky plays. So I still think collectively the defense from that standpoint is in good shape.
All right, out of the South now, 4-6 after those 3 weekends, hitting a bunch of Southern states, coming back. Supposed to be at Omaha tomorrow and then home opener Wednesday afternoon before the Big Ten opener this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday against Washington. Before the Big Ten, Omaha and South Dakota State. Look at those teams, but also we're seeing a lot of weather moving through all of a sudden, potentially getting cold enough for some overnight snows Tuesday into Wednesday. Woo-hoo. What are you guys hearing on? I mean, you're an Omaha guy. You're seeing that weather a lot more than I am. But potential to not have the first game back here in Nebraska?
Well, the good news is I think the weekend, other than Friday maybe being a little bit cooler and chance of rain and snow, Saturday and Sunday look very good. Heck, I think Sunday looks like it's in the mid-60s. So I feel great about that Washington series happening in some way, shape, or form. Everything I was hearing over the weekend from the folks at Omaha being there for hockey, I know that they were monitoring very closely. And then I don't know if you got the same thing I did this morning. All of a sudden we get the winter weather watch notification on our phone thinking, oh, come on now. So it's an all-turf field at Tal Anderson, but here's the problem. I know Omaha, and I don't blame them for this. Omaha is going to want to be able to maximize that gate. So if you're somehow moving the first pitch up, and I don't even know if that's on the table, but if there's a window that you can get it in, if you're able to move that up, if you're Omaha, are you able to maximize what you're going to get out of the gate when Nebraska comes? No.
There's 20 people there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the good news is these are both regional teams, one obviously just 45 minutes away, that I hope it's early enough in the season where you can look at and say, hey, we only have one midweek game this week. We could double up there. South Dakota State, you could do the same thing with them, especially, and I haven't even looked at their schedule when they play Omaha, but maybe you can figure out something when they're playing Omaha if Nebraska is clear as well. So I would think that right now, if I had to make a guess, I would say it's 75-25 that we don't see midweek baseball this week. That's just what I'm going to throw out there.
All right. Well, just like Jordan said, probably not playing till the weekend. Saturday at best. Thanks for listening, Jordan. We'll get to Washington and the Big Ten Conference on our Thursday show. Maybe talk about if a midweek game was played.